Good morning and welcome everyone. I am very excited this morning. Then we're going to discuss Snowflake as the most cost-effective, agile, and scalable data warehouse available today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day, and we hope that the experience that we share and the knowledge that we bring will be of value in return. A couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is going to be recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out later today. Obviously, if you're not on the call right now, then you won't get the message, but even if you're not on the call, you will be able to get the link and watch it at your leisure. Another item, we encourage everyone to post any questions or thoughts that you might have. We really want this to be a discussion with the audience, and sometimes it's a challenge to get everybody involved, but put your comments into the comments box in the WebEx application, and we will see those and address them as we can during this next hour. So this is the usual disclaimer that we have on each of our webinars. It really just means that what we're talking about today is Visual BI's point of view. Your environment may be different from ours, your stack might be different, your results may also vary, and this is just the way that we see it today. So Visual BI, if you're not familiar with us, we're an all-in-one BI and analytics enablement firm delivering services, solutions, training, and products. We are partnered with some great companies, including SAP, Microsoft, Snowflake, Tableau, Tibco, Looker, and a whole bunch of other leaders in the BI and analytics market so that we can bring our products, solutions, training, and services along with those. We encourage everybody to get in touch with us and see how we can work together or partner. So on today's agenda, we're going to first introduce the other speakers who are on the call with me today. Then we're going to talk about the ins and outs of Snowflake and how it fits into enterprise analytics. We'll also introduce you to DBT, which is an open source product that is really rethinking and reimagining the way that data is transformed. Very excited to have those folks with us today. We'll then walk through an enterprise data flow that uses Snowflake and DBT and some other products from an enterprise customer. And then we'll take a few minutes to show you some of the Snowflake goodies and finally answer all the questions that we haven't answered at that point. So it's an honor and a pleasure, honestly, to be joined by these two giants. We've got Ryan Goltz of Chesapeake Energy, which is a company that is really demonstrating through its actions how it embraces leading edge BI and analytics. Ryan, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Ryan Goltz. I'm a principal data architect at Chesapeake Energy. Been kind of in the data space at large with Chesapeake for the last 11 years. So I've kind of done everything from data warehousing to master data management and finally application integration.
Awesome. We're also joined by Tristan Handy, who's the CEO of Fishtown Analytics, and these are the guys that created and maintain the open source DBT application. Tristan, what's your background?
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm the CEO of Fishtown Analytics, and we've been maintaining DBT and the DBT community for about 3 years now, so excited to be here to talk about it.
Awesome, great. I'm really glad to have both these guys. And so I'm Chris Holliday. I'm the Senior Vice President of Client Management with Visual BI. I've been with Visual BI for around 7 years now. I've basically run the services organization and deal with this stack on a daily basis. And I can just say from all of us, we're all excited to be here. So first, we're going to talk about Snowflake. And what I want to start with is that the creators of Snowflake really saw the future of cloud-based services and applications, and they built from the ground up a database that takes advantage of what you look at as the massive scalability and elasticity and power of the cloud. Really the big picture concepts include that as a true software as a service, you as a customer have no management responsibility or even really management options for the database engine. So Snowflake takes care of all of those things for you, things that we're used to spending a lot of time, energy, and money on. They've separated the storage and compute and then layered cloud services on top. And what this really means is that you never have resources competing with each other. Snowflake was built as a hybrid shared disk and shared nothing architecture, which pretty much wraps up all of the major database engines that we're all familiar with. And this is pertinent to how it works and why it works so well, but it's really irrelevant to how you design your models. So you don't have to know how Snowflake works under the covers. You don't have to know when it performs better or when it doesn't perform better, because the truth of the matter is it just works all of the time. And this is something that on legacy databases and a legacy architecture, we had to know how our system worked in order to model correctly and make it perform as well as possible. Snowflake can store and query with equal ease both structured and semi-structured data. So if your data is coming in as JSON or XML or ORC or Parquet files, Snowflake can load all that and query that with exactly the same ease as if it was structured CSVs or tab delineated files. This pretty much gives you the option to create a lake and a warehouse in exactly the same application, but it really facilitates new and more varied architectures as well. So the elasticity that Snowflake brings is exactly what we all really dreamed of when we first started to see what cloud architectures look like. We could see the future, but Snowflake really built the future, I'd say. It will seamlessly scale up and, more importantly, back down instantaneously or almost instantaneously. And this is something that separates it really from the rest of the competition. So you can go from a suspended warehouse and in a sub-second enablement, you get a cluster that's operating, whether it is a single node VPC as an extra small or a huge 128 node 4XL. All of that happens really in less than a second. So this really decouples our data warehousing workloads, and we're going to see examples of this from Ryan later on today. So whether you're doing a load or you're doing a query or an unload or some deep analytics, all of those things are completely separated from each other and they're not competing. You don't have to schedule or queue things up in order to do that. So the engine uses SQL, and really that's it. You don't need any special skills. You don't need to have to spend 3 months in class to learn how all this thing works. Most folks who would be on a call like this probably are familiar with SQL, and that means that you know as much about it as just about anybody else. There's no complex GUIs, there's no proprietary programming languages. You just run SQL. And what this means is with Snowflake, you can really just get up and running pretty quickly. So it not only performs faster, but it also returns value more quickly than pretty much any other database on the market. Let's talk about what it's not. And we're going to use this word opinionated, and we're going to say Snowflake is not opinionated. And in that context, what we really mean is that whether you want to use a Ralph Kimball model or an Inman model or a Data Vault model, Snowflake is not going to really care about that. It's going to facilitate any of those things. So whether we're talking about your warehouse design or the way you set up your security roles, what kind of best practices or lack of best practices you want to use, Snowflake is going to allow you to do pretty much whatever you want. It's going to facilitate that easily, but it's not going to have an opinion about it. It doesn't say you must use an Inman data model. Snowflake is not an integration platform. So that means that you can use any integration platform that you want, and we'll show you, quite a bit of detail about that in a second here. But it doesn't care which one you use, and it's not going to force you into using a specific integration platform or methodology for that matter. So you can go as old school as you want to, or you can go as cutting edge as you want to, and Snowflake is going to smile and continue to deliver. Snowflake's not a reporting tool; it's a database. You could, frankly, if you really wanted to, you could probably try to use it as a reporting tool, but that is not what it's designed for, and it's not what it's good at. Snowflake is not an OLAP layer. So if you're in a frenzy about MDX and you love to write MDX queries, or you need a cube and your use case dictates that, then you would put an OLAP layer on top of Snowflake for that purpose. We want to say Snowflake is not expensive, and it can be expensive if you let it be expensive. And just like anything where you have to manage your resources and you pay for what you use, you'll need to manage that appropriately. But Snowflake gives you the tools, they give you the insights, and they even provide technology like caching of your queries in order to help you save money and keep it inexpensive. And I think finally, with all of the above, we look at it and we say it's not difficult to use. It's not at all. It's very simple. There's no tuning. There's no tweaking. There's simply writing SQL, and you've got everything that you need for a data warehouse. And Ryan or Tristan, you guys jump in here anytime you want if you want to add anything to this. But
I was just going to jump in and say that we've used Snowflake a lot ourselves, and a lot of folks' first reaction to someone telling them all of the things that Chris just said is that, like, you can't actually possibly be correct. Like, that sounds too good to be true. And my response to folks when they say that is you have to actually just experience it. It actually does end up working as well as Chris is indicating, and it's hard to believe that until you touch it yourself. But fortunately, they make it pretty easy to get your hands on it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I mean, we were really dubious when we first started talking to Snowflake, and I think I pushed against the sales team, and I ultimately got somebody in engineering on the phone and started asking what I thought were a lot of really hard questions that have tripped up vendors in the past, right? And every time they came back and they had an answer, and I was able to relate that to my pretty deep understanding of how databases work and perform, and it's really pretty incredible. I mean, they've really designed a system that by its very nature of its design addresses so many common issues that we've seen. And really, until you get into very large data sets, there's very little thought to put into actually performing the physical structuring of the system for performance. Is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I concur 100%. So when we look at Snowflake for the enterprise, I think that historically, when it started, like all new technology, startups and software companies and technology companies and companies that are close to the origins of Snowflake were going to be the initial consumers of the service. Enterprises are, in some cases, rightfully fearful of adopting new technology, fiduciary obligations to shareholders and the like. I think everybody has to approach things as cautiously and as carefully as their model will facilitate. But that's no longer the case. Snowflake is 100% for the enterprise. All of the enterprise tools that you're used to working with will marry up they tuck right in with Snowflake. You want to get underneath the chicken spot under the chicken's wing there. It's incredible how fluidly it all comes together. So if you're an Alteryx shop or MuleSoft, Informatica, SAP Data Services, all those things work seamlessly with Snowflake. So you've got enterprise integration, big data, and reporting tools on this slide. And if your use case, one of the things that I really want to talk about here is that in the more robust analytics, so if we're talking about machine learning or deep learning, if you're using Data Robot or Databricks or Spark, those tools work really well with Snowflake as well. So now, where traditionally my tools may not have worked so fluidly with my data store, Databricks and Snowflakes work together so well as both a source and a destination. It is amazing how fluidly that comes together. And as we look at replacing the Hadoop use case, where I've got a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen nodes of my Hadoop cluster, I can replace that whole thing with my subscription to Databricks and my engagement with Snowflake. It works really seamlessly. And then underneath all of that, the things that enterprises are looking for from a security governance and management standpoint, those things all sort of ride underneath that. And you can build any kind of security model you want. You can handle as much or as little governance as you want, and Snowflake gives you the tools to manage your instance. When we talk about decisions that have to be made as we stand up this stack, and I think we all have different experiences with different tools and different platforms, but at the end of the day, from a consumer standpoint, Snowflake runs pretty much independently from the cloud it's hosted on. So it takes advantage of the underlying infrastructure, but it completely abstracts us as the consumers away from those things. So there's minor variations in functionality between, for example, what you'd get on AWS and what you'd get on Azure or Snowflake, but parity is closing in on 100%. And I think that the differences are not always going to be relevant to every consumer, for sure. I haven't run across those problems yet, but I'm not saying that other folks haven't. So by the end of this year, you will be able to run Snowflake pretty much transparently across the three major clouds, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, including replication between clouds. And I think that's important to note, that if you live in a hybrid cloud world, then replicating from AWS to Azure, from GCP to Azure or AWS is handled at the account level in Snowflake. It's pretty much as easy as everything else in Snowflake, and quite incredible. For integration and transformation tools, all of the traditional server-based and now the cloud-based and cloud-native tools are available for your processing. Which ones you choose and for which use case can be a little bit daunting, but this is something that that we can help with during a strategic or implementation engagement. It makes sense to use certain tools for certain use cases, and sometimes it makes sense to use one tool for all use cases, but knowing when to do each of those things is something that experience can help with. So on the data pipeline side, I think that there's kind of a lot going on this slide. We're talking about the ingestion of data and the transformation of data, and this is kind of the last slide that we're going to talk about for Snowflake. When data can be ingested in a lot of different ways, but under the covers, which again you don't necessarily have to know about, but under the covers, regardless of the tool that you use, it's all going to happen pretty much in the same way. So we've laid it out here that you've got some cloud storage and you've got some files that come in, and then that data is going to move into Snowflake, and it's going to move in either via a Snowpipe, or it's going to move in via a stage, or even a direct query to a container or bucket in your cloud storage. You've got tools that can help facilitate that, and services. So you've got cloud SaaS models in Fivetran and Stitch and Luma. You can do this with tools that at an enterprise level you're more familiar with, like Informatica or SSIS. All of these things can fit into the equation, but ultimately getting them in is going to look similar to what we've got in the top left corner. Now, Snowpipe is a somewhat revolutionary process that handles continuous ingestion from containers. And so what that means is that if I set up a bucket in my, let's say in my S3, and it is pulling in, discrete transactions from a point of sale system, for example, then Snowpipe will automatically pick up those files and load them based on whatever copy into statement that I've determined is necessary to get those into my database. This changes the paradigm a little bit. I think in general, this paradigm looks different than what most enterprise data architects are used to. If you haven't used a system like this before and you're used to doing direct, push from, in Power Center or in SAP BODs or something like that. But this is definitely a process that works exceedingly well, and again simplifies the whole data flow process. So during the ingestion, you can do some transformation. I mean, honestly, you can do whatever you want, as we've already established that Snowflake is not opinionated, but In terms of what we would recommend, do minor transformations as you load data into a raw area or a staging area in Snowflake. And then, you handle the bigger transformations in this lower stack down here transformation logic that can be everything from just, straight SQL queries that you manually run to scripts and cron jobs or DBT or a specific GUI-based tool, whatever your organization is used to. We have preferences and recommendations, and with Tristan here, we're definitely have an affinity to DBT. But ultimately, once you get the data in, it becomes part of a more traditional data warehousing type model with newer tools available to it. I'll point out that there are native connectors in the top right-hand corner. So whether you're a Python shop or a .NET shop, if you want to write an app in Node.js and that automatically pushes data into Snowflake, it's going to use the same type of staging process under the covers, but you can do direct writes to tables and other things like that. So, guys, did you want to add anything about this slide? So really, I think to just kind of wrap this up, there are a million unique features with Snowflake that we could talk about endlessly, including things like time travel and zero copy clones. But we really kind of wanted to give you the bigger picture overview of Snowflake and save some of those for a future webinar. So with that, we're going to head into the DBT area.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. So DBT is the T in the modern ELT stack. So historically, before loading data into a warehouse, you would typically do the transformations in some intermediate environment. And recently that's been a Hadoop environment, and prior to that, it was all kinds of other bespoke architectures. But now databases like Snowflake are so powerful that you no longer need to do your transformations in an intermediate environment like that. You can simply load all the raw data into into Snowflake and treat that like a data lake. And then you can start applying transformations once the data has already been loaded. So that's what we see modern organizations doing that are making usage of Snowflake. And we built DBT to help out with that use case. What we were seeing 3 years ago was that lots and lots of companies were creating kind of very raw SQL scripts to do this type of processing. And so DBT is a framework to allow people to do data transformation using SQL as the primary language and taking advantage of Snowflake as a processing environment. But give them leverage, give them tools so that they don't have to write every single line of DML by hand. So DBT adds a templating layer on top called Jinja that allows users to create dynamic behavior that wouldn't normally be in SQL. The most important thing that this layer lets you do is that you can create nested sets of transformations that depend on each other. You create what's called a directed acyclic graph. And that's so critical because as you do data transformations, you never just write one SQL statement that then produces all of your fact and dimension tables. You stack them one on top of another. So DBT allows you to do that in a very seamless way. Because all of the work that you do in DBT is in code, in SQL and in Jinja, it makes it very easy to adopt modern software engineering practices. You can do things like version control all of your analytic code. You can do integration testing to make sure that the data that's being produced is actually valid. And you can do continuous integration and continuous deployment. All of those become straightforward with DBT. Honestly, not because of any particular DBT magic, but because you're in a code-first environment and can integrate into all of these tools that are more prevalent in a software engineering ecosystem.
Yeah, and Tristan, one thing that I think people might not catch when you talk about the DAG, right? It's really a powerful concept because in our environment, in our warehouse, we need to go and build a whole bunch of objects in a certain order because they have a set of dependencies, right? And historically, that has been implemented in these large, complex job plans or orchestration flows. And now, instead of going through and building 50 jobs for each of the dependent objects and drawing all the lines together for this big job plan, DBT does that for us. And so we just basically think about what objects do we need to build, we put them into the tool, and at runtime it goes and figures that stuff out for us. So it's a huge time saver for us during development, and it greatly reduces our operational cost as well. You take away the idea of essentially, restart points, and you just start back over again with DBT.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. So we've been building DBT for about 3 years. It was actually something that we wanted to start building once we saw databases like Snowflake come out, and we realized, oh, there's actually the possibility here of doing this transformation step of the process in a completely different way than people had been doing it before. So over the past 3 years, we've gotten a lot of traction, especially early adopters, but we're starting to see more adoption from the enterprise. There's about 1,000 companies running DBT in production today. That's growing pretty fast. And Snowflake is definitely the most popular warehouse in the DBT community. There's about a third of DBT's user base is using Snowflake as their warehouse today. And I think that's not a surprise because Snowflake, as Chris was saying before, Snowflake gives you so many controls over how you set up your infrastructure, and it makes it so seamless to do things like separate storage from compute, separate the compute of one user from the compute of another user so that they're totally isolated. All of these things are the kinds of features that you need if you really want to treat your data warehouse as a first-class environment to do your data transformations. And Snowflake gives you all those knobs and levers, and it actually makes it very easy to tune them. Yeah, I think that's we're excited to see the growth and the traction. The thing that DBT is not, that I want to make it super clear, is DBT is not a data ingestion tool. And some tools that you may be familiar with in enterprise context that do data transformation, they also do data ingestion because it's been a part of this ETL workflow. DBT makes the assumption right out of the gate that you've already got all of your data in Snowflake. So however you want to do that, and there's a bunch of options that Chris outlined before, whether that's Snowpipe or copy commands or Snowflake external tables or cloud SaaS tools like Stitch and Fivetran. Get that data into Snowflake, and then you can start working with it in DBT, from transformations to snapshotting to testing to documentation. There's one particular thing that I wanted to highlight that's a little unusual that DBT provides that a lot of other tools in this category don't focus as much on. DBT has a fully baked in auto documentation feature. So as you're writing code to architect your transformations, DBT understands that code and how it's structured, and it's able to build you a website, a fully like HTML browser-based website that allows either you, as you're developing your transformations, or your users, as you've deployed your transformations, to navigate through the project in a graphical way. In the bottom left, you can see the visuals. This is actually the graph, and it flows from left to right, and you can see the green boxes are data sources, and then each of the little teal boxes are data transformations. And at the end, you arrive at a single fact model that would get queried in a BI tool. So this allows you to these transformation graphs can get very complicated. It's not unusual to see hundreds and maybe even low numbers of thousands of these transformations in a DBT project. And it's hard to navigate these without some visual way to parse through and see what's going on there. So DBT Docs allows you to do that. You can right click into any one of those and get more information on the table, documentation that's been written by the analyst by hand, or you can just see all of the columns in their data type.
Definitely one of my top 3 favorite features with DBT. It's hard for me to pick one, but this is definitely one that I love over and over and over again.
Cool, thanks. Other quick note, DBT Cloud is a proprietary cloud-based offering that we have. Everything that we've talked to up until this point is 100% open source. You can just go to GitHub and start using everything that we've talked about to this point. We also have a fully managed cloud product that allows you to schedule DBT jobs, get logs, get notifications. You can construct an entire continuous integration pipeline. You can share the documentation throughout your organization. And soon there's going to be a full graphical IDE that will make it easier for data analysts who are less familiar with the command line to be first-class users of DBT and write all of their DBT code inside of a browser. So you can kind of pick either path. You can go the fully open source route, or you can go the easy mode and sign up for the cloud product and get a nice wrapper around that experience.
Yeah, this is something that we don't see a lot in the enterprise, data pipelines for traditional ETL and ELT tools. So we don't have versioning, we don't have pushing code up to repos and things like that. So things like CI/CD this is like foreign language for a lot of folks, but this is a game changer, people. This is something that really we look at it from a software engineering standpoint for companies that have been doing this for decades in the development platforms. And now this is available for data pipelines. It really does change the game, and I think that DBT Cloud is a fantastic tool to operate those CI/CD pipelines.
Amazing, cool. So to kind of wrap up the DBT section, our main focus as a product, as a company, is to democratize data engineering. Historically, it's required a fairly technical skill set to be able to produce these type of data pipelines. And the challenge there is that there's never enough people who have that skill set, and those people are never as close to the business as the data analysts. And so we want to build a tool that allows users that are closer to the business, frequently data analysts, to construct first-class data pipelines themselves with participation from data engineering. Anyone who can write SQL can write DBT data transformations, and with Snowflake they can scale those transformations up to whatever data volume you need. So the result of this is that it's generally pushing the data transformation more to the edges, and it's enabling more users throughout the business. You can then iterate faster. Your data is more reliable. Your users trust that data more, and there's more transparency throughout the entire process. So those are things that historically you would not have said about data pipelines, but we really think that moving in that direction is going to be critical to actually getting the value out of tools like Snowflake.
Okay, completely agree with that. Thank you so much, Tristan. Now we're going to shift over to what a real-world data flow looks like, as Ryan's going to tell us about what in general terms, about how Chesapeake operates some of their pipelines. So take it over. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I mentioned earlier I've been here working at Chesapeake for more than 10 years, and I can say in that time, we've seen it all. We've had a large multi-terabyte Oracle warehouse. We've had SQL Server Departmental March. We've had HANA. We've had Cloudera. We've done it all, right? And I think there have been things that were more successful than others. I'd point to our Oracle warehouse and the fact that I think data warehousing in that kind of realm has been written about for a number of years, and it's well documented, and everybody knows how to do it, right? And as new technologies came in, like HANA and Cloudera, they provided certain positive things and certain negative things. There were always trade-offs, right? And so when we started this process, our goal was really pretty simple. I mean, we wanted to remove this complexity from our environment, both in terms of the technologies themselves and the variability of the technology. And we wanted to kind of simplify what we were doing in places where it worked well. And then we wanted to give, users the performance that they desired and at the same time reduce the total cost of ownership. And so those were kind of our goals. And I think that Snowflake and DBT have been great on all those counts. And we'll talk about that a little bit here. But I think our approach really was 4 steps. First of all, we needed, as Chris talked about earlier, you need a way to get your data there, right? So we really looked at that in 2 buckets, right? We knew that we had a lot of legacy applications. We needed an efficient way to move that data to the cloud. So we chose a pipeline tool for that. And then we started to see SaaS applications come in as well, and users have a great desire to get data out of those SaaS applications and get it into some central reporting store so that they can report on it together with other data. So I think those were our 2 big considerations, and I'd really, reinforce that people do need to think about those SaaS apps, because if you don't think about that, you'll find that your users' data is getting locked away in these systems. But once you get past all of that, we really were able to get back to the basics of data warehousing, right? Where do you want to put your data? How do you want to separate the source data from the transform data? All of that typical stuff. And one thing that Snowflake really helped with is that, unlike a traditional system, the idea of having additional databases and schemas is free. You can have as many different databases as you want. It doesn't cost you more money to add a database, and it also doesn't hinder your capability to access data across those databases. You can perform cross-database queries without any penalty. So you can really leverage Snowflake to set up the logical architecture the way you want it to work. And we, of course, had to answer all the typical data warehouse questions of how do you want to ensure that the data that the users are reading is clean and follows all the necessary business rules. One thing that I would point out that ELT sort of becomes an all or nothing process. So you need to think about the staging and how you want to move the data through and capture those quality issues and prevent them from rolling through. And when you do that, I'd really recommend that data quality gets served back out to your business. And of course, these are all classic data warehouse use cases. Once you have that logical architecture, you get to make the infrastructure type decisions that historically would be really, really painful, right? So in the classic legacy world, you would be making a decision about the hardware you want to run the database on, the hardware you want to run your ETL platform on, the networking in between those. All this stuff would kind of be on you to decide. And again, Snowflake totally changes that. Right? And Chris talked about this earlier, that you can go and spin up another warehouse and say, oh, I want to put my transformation workload there. I want to put my data ingest workload there. On another location, I want to put my warehouse, my BI processes on a third location. And so you can really set up all these different locations for the workloads to occur. You can scale those things out so that if you have a really chatty process like ingest pipelines running across 40 different source systems, you can set up concurrent warehouses or clustered warehouses to address all that, right? So I think my point there is that you still need to make those decisions around the quote unquote infrastructure for the warehouse, but it's really just going into the Snowflake console saying I need a warehouse here, and that's where I'm going to do this workload. That's a great advantage. And then the fourth thing for us, and this was really a struggle, was getting past our prior assumptions. We came from a background of needing to build and tune these processes to get the workloads done on Oracle. We brought a lot of baggage, I think, to the table with this, and so we initially started out thinking, oh, we need to be very, very tightly managed and finite in the workloads that we process. We need to be able to only process the changed rows, and that sort of classic mentality. And at the end of the day, I think there are two huge takeaways. The whole process of developing incremental stuff is way overrated. And secondly, that DBT made that process of simply reloading the data all the time really easy, because on top of the fact that Snowflake has the performance to let you just reload most of the data every time, DBT adds some additional functionality to facilitate those transactions and help keep that data online while you're doing your full reloads. So just to kind of quantify that, I can say that we took one process that an initial load in Oracle would take 48 hours. We would start it on Friday and it would get done Sunday night, I'm sorry. And then we invested another month beyond that in the original development cycle to get efficient incremental loads. At the end of the day on Snowflake and with DBT, we just said, forget about it. We build the data set every time, and it takes 3 minutes. I believe that's on either an extra small or a small cluster. So we're not throwing a lot of money at it to get that done. So once we got past all this process and really, answered these questions and laid out the architecture and got rid of our baggage that we brought to the table, at the end of the day, our warehouse team is spending their time developing models to deliver functionality to the business, not developing specific Oracle functionality or specific Power Center tricks of the trade to do all that work. And so our cycle times really go down. We get the data out faster and on a platform that works better for our users.
And it's almost like, regardless of the journey you take to get there, you don't have to use MuleSoft and HVR like you've determined here. Regardless of the journey that you take in order to get to some reporting, some analytics, everybody seems to come to the same conclusion when they use Snowflake, that, it just works, it saves you time, and it saves you money. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of those decisions, and you said this earlier, Chris, on what pipelines you use to get data in will be driven more by your environment. Once you get into the Snowflake environment, it gets a lot easier.
That's right. No, that's great. Let's move on here.
Yeah, so I think, that everything I talked about, that's really about improving on your classic IT-centric delivery model, right? That was all functionality to go help our data warehouse team go do their jobs more quickly. But I don't think that's the end of the story. There's a great appetite in the business for data, and I believe that IT is never going to be able to keep up with the business true interest in the data, and that if we can let the business act on the data on their own, they'll probably feel more free to be creative and solve their own problems and help our enterprise. So the issue with that in the past has been that the data warehouse has been very technically complex, and it became the sole purveyor of that data. The tools that were used to load the data warehouse were complex. As Tristan pointed out, you can take a tool like DBT, take people analysts that know how to use SQL and give them a tool to go and build things in the warehouse that they couldn't do before. The warehouse had to be very closely managed and highly change controlled because the loads that were occurring and the queries that users were issuing were all competing with resources. Snowflake kind of takes care of this through isolating the workloads through warehouses. And then finally, getting the queries to run efficiently required quite a bit of tuning. You had to index, you had to partition, you had to do a whole lot of technical stuff that most people don't understand. And Snowflake, as we talked about earlier, it really addresses most of those use cases without tuning. So I think once you get some of these technical things out of the way, you can start to look at your system and say, okay, this is really something that my users can go out and use for self-service. We really had three main concerns with implementing self-service. The first of them was, well, how do you organize this thing, right? How do we know where a person should go to do their work? And that's fairly simple for us. I mean, we essentially built databases and warehouses that align with our existing value chains so that we know this set of work and this set of users, they belong here, and they're probably able to see the other information, and that's the right work group for them to go and create and share that information. The second step really was a governance model, and I think if we sort of think at a high level about the open source community over the last 20 years, they've done a great job of creating a governance model for very important open source projects. There are open source projects that are creating core functionality that are used in enterprises, and they have created a process or a workflow that helps provide governance. And we went and applied that same CI/CD type workflow to our self-service environment. So we use pull requests to make sure that the work or the changes that are being submitted to an area are appropriate. And those pull requests can go to IT and the data stewards, and they can look at that thing and say, yeah, this change makes sense or it doesn't. We use the CI/CD pipeline to address change authorization. So we've gone and integrated that in with our change management system, and we go through and we create changes, and we make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, just like we normally do, but we've automated all of that. And then finally, when we get to testing, DBT is a huge help in this area because we can now go and automate that testing. So if you think about a report that happens in a financial area, for example, your auditor will come to you and say, well, how do you know that this report matches the upstream transactional data? And you would have to go and manually run one to many different queries on the upstream transactional data, run your report, and show them that all those numbers tie, right? And with automated testing, you can kind of turn that on its ear and say, well, we're going to go and create this linear balance between the transactional data, the source system data, and our downstream warehouse structures automatically by executing these automated tests. And in our case, we can run those tests every time we load the data. So now, instead of the auditor coming to you and your business users taking time away from their jobs to run these queries and validate all of this data, you can tell the auditor, we run these tests every day. Here's all the logs of these tests. Here's how we're confident this data is correct. And I think that's a really compelling argument. You know, you take those pieces of the governance model to your business group, and I think they can get really comfortable with the idea of managing their own data. And then finally, once you do that, the concept of what IT is doing for these users really shifts. And you can start to switch into an enablement model where you train the users, you develop the best practices, you implement the processes that support these things like the CI/CD process I've been discussing, and then you enforce standards. And I think that's a really great model because at the end of the day, like I said, the business users can bring their innovation, and then the Center for Enablement provides a way to ensure the governance and sustainability of that innovation.
Yeah, outstanding. And you know, when you look at this from an enterprise perspective, and you say this is 100% achievable, the value prop is very easy to see and to understand. There are definitely paradigm shifts, but I think that the reward for that is remarkable. You know, I mean, this is what we dreamed of, and it's coming to fruition, and you guys at Chesapeake have been able to demonstrate that. So well done on that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I want to quantify one thing with that. I mean, we have users that have been waiting months and months and months for a modification to a report to a data structure, and they can go and do it themselves now.
Yeah.
And so what that's a win-win for IT and the business.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. Okay, great. So I want to remind everybody on the call that it would be a great time if you have any questions to go ahead and add those questions in. Next up for our agenda is we are going to spend a little bit of time doing some demonstrations in Snowflake and talking through a couple of different features. I would like to announce formally that this is not my day job. I am not typically in doing development work, but this is a testament to how simple this is, that that even a guy like me can get in here and do a few things. So I've got a couple of different instances open here. In fact, I've just got two different instances from Visual BI's internal Snowflake here, and I'm going to just run through a couple of different scenarios. I think Tristan and Ryan and I were chatting yesterday talking about, and I think Tristan pointed it out, that to see what Snowflake is to really look at and get your hands dirty and grind through it to look at a few things. And unfortunately, my neighbor has started to do some yard work just as I pick this up, so we'll have a little bit of background color going on here. So I'm looking at a couple of different things, and you can see some databases open. If you're not familiar with it, this is the worksheet environment within Snowflake. If I just go through the GUI a little bit and look at what this site tells me, I've got different databases that are called out. From databases, I can either create or clone a database. And then once I start to click into a database, I can look at the different tables and schemas and views and stages and file formats and maybe some other things that are not familiar to people. But in this case, this one has some tables that are created by Stitch that's connected to a point of sale system and is pulling in data as it's actually happening. And so we have, this is something, here are the warehouses. So these are the compute engines that are used to run queries and to run loads. And you can see that there is auto suspension enabled at different intervals for some of these, and this can get down to a pretty low number. Most of these are extra smalls because that's all we really need to work with, but I have created one that's a medium for a Looker demo that we were working on. And so if I go back to worksheets here and I want to, so first I'm going to take this analytics 2 and I'm just going to drop it in, because that's stuff that you might do in the course of your normal day-to-day. I'm just going to drop already dropped. Okay, so let's just create it then. And there we have it. If I refresh over here, now I see that Analytics 2 is there, and it's just got the information of public schemas, which are the standard that come with Snowflake. So I'm actually going to go back and drop. What I really want to do is I want to make a copy of this database over here. So this database has some tables in it. It's got some staging views, a dimension, and some dimensions and fact tables. And what I really want to do is I want to make a copy of this so I can do some testing. So in the enterprise world, we are all used to the incredibly painful notion that I need to refresh my test or my dev environment. So, for those of us in the SAP world, maybe we do this twice a year if we're lucky. Sometimes some of us are ultra lucky and we can do it once a quarter. And the pain and agony that's associated with that is unbelievable. So in Snowflake, I have this something called zero copy clone. So I can create a database and I'll call this Analytics 3 clone Analytics Okay, so this is just going to of my existing database. What did I do around here? Yeah, it's called ECR Analytics, so that's fine. ECR_analytics. Yep. And so it's going to go out and it is going to make a copy of this database and all of the things that are in it and create something. So in 7.86 seconds, it created a copy, and it's called Analytics 3. I misspelled it, but that's okay. Snowflake doesn't care. And there I've got the tables and the views that were associated with that, and that happened in under 8 seconds. So you can imagine the changes to your workflow if you are cloning things. Now, what happened in this clone is that the metadata that was associated with ECR Analytics was cloned. The data is actually shared up to this point. If I add a row to one of these tables, that row will only exist in this cloned database. It will not exist in the source database. So this is the perfect environment for me to now run some testing and do all kinds of other fancy things that I would have to do in my dev environment or my test environment and in the enterprise. Tristan and Ryan, you guys jump in here anytime you want to. So let's take a look at, so I'm just going to use I'll use the new one. Okay. Analytics 3. So it's called. Yep. Okay. So now I'm using Analytics 3, and I'm going to just query a specific table in there, and I will query this dim items, right? So I'll just get a count from dim items. Normal database stuff, and it doesn't like dim items for whatever reason. Let me just go back and use this other database here. Okay, and then I will do this database over here. And I will set this as the context for everything else that I'm doing. So this tells Snowflake in this worksheet that from here on I'm going to use the ECR raw database, and I'm going to use the Elemental Cafe. And I'm going to run a query on and it's going to give me a count of 158,420. Now, here's another unique feature to Snowflake called time travel. And so if I want to see what's the count of this table as of 24 hours ago. So I have this notion that I can use this at qualifier and an offset, or I could use a timestamp, or I could use a number of different date objects in order to tell it when to do this query. But I'm going to query this as of 24 hours ago. So I'm going to offset a negative 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours. And it's going to give me 158, 155. So let's go back and make a note of that. 158, 155. And now I'll come back here and do it as of right now. 58, 449. Okay, so you can see a difference of roughly 300 transactions between this 24 hours. So that's super exciting. In standard terms, this will hold for a day. On an enterprise license with Snowflake, you can take this back to 90 days. Gives you all kinds of exciting opportunities to check the delta between different things. So once again, folks, please add in any questions that you might have. We are getting close to the end of the hour here. Actually, I think the end of the hour has now arrived. So I want to just say thank you to both Tristan and Ryan, and thank you to everyone who was able to join the webinar today. There will be a link for this. If you want any of the slides, send us out an email, and if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to shoot us an email on that as well. Thank you very much.